Don't you dare touch that car. It's against the bylaws." Margaret's voice cracked through the night like glass under pressure. Hazard lights pulsed red and amber across the cul-de-sac, casting jagged shadows on the neat lawns and stucco homes. The tow truck's hydraulic winch screamed as chains scraped against asphalt, rattling like metal bones. Porch lights flicked on in a domino effect down the block. Curtains twitched, blinds tilted, neighbors whispering behind glass. And there, center stage, stood Margaret Simmons, president of the Willow Creek HOA, her pearl necklace gleaming in the streetlight like a string of victory medals. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed into a razor-thin smile, she looked like she was about to crown herself queen of suburban justice. Now, here's the thing. Margaret believed she had me dead to rights. She thought this midnight tow would be her shining triumph, proof to every neighbor that no one was above her rules. And in a way, she was right. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. But Margaret didn't know that I had spent months preparing for her. It all started with the letters. First came the friendly reminders, slid neatly into my mailbox with the HOA letterhead and her self-important signature at the bottom. They were about parking violations, how my driveway had too many vehicles, how one car was parked too close to the curb, how my work truck was an eyesore. The wording was all polite, but the subtext was sharp. Get in line, or we'll make you. Then came the escalation. A certified envelope stamped Notice of Violation. Margaret had upgraded from passive-aggressive notes to bureaucratic warfare. I still remember reading it over coffee, the smell of fresh grounds mixing with the bitter aftertaste of her threats. Failure to comply will result in fines, liens, and towing at owner's expense. I laughed. Not because it wasn't serious. HOAs can and do tow cars. No, I laughed because Margaret had no clue who she was dealing with. See, Willow Creek HOA contracts with a local towing company for enforcement. Margaret made a big show about how she personally negotiated that contract to save the neighborhood money. What she didn't realize was that I had bought that same towing company 6 months earlier. Quietly, under the radar. Cash deal. My little side business turned side weapon, which brings us back to that night. Midnight. Margaret, pearls, clipboard, and a tow truck she thought she commanded like her personal cavalry. The driver stepped out, heavy boots thudding against the pavement, his reflective vest catching the glow of the truck's lights. He looked at me, then at Margaret, then back at the car he was supposed to haul away. This the one?" he asked, thumb hooked toward my sedan. "Yes," Margaret snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. "Multiple vehicles non-compliant parked beyond the limit. This resident has been warned. Proceed." She thrust the clipboard forward, papers clipped tight, her red nails tapping the signature line like a judge's gavel. I leaned against my porch railing, coffee mug warm in my hand, and watched. The smell of cut grass and gasoline lingered in the air. A mockingbird, disturbed by the commotion, shrieked from the maple tree. My neighbors' faces glowed faintly behind curtains, hungry for drama. The driver shifted uneasily. I don't see the ticket number on here," he said, scanning Margaret's paperwork. "We usually get an authorization from dispatch, not, He trailed off as Margaret's glare hardened. "You have my authorization," she said, chin lifting. "I am the president of this association. That's all the authorization you need." I couldn't help it. I chuckled. It slipped out, low and sharp like the crack of a whip. Margaret's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "What's funny?" she barked. I raised my mug in a mock toast. "Just enjoying the show." Her face flushed pink, pearls trembling against her chest as she huffed. "You won't be laughing when that car is gone in 5 minutes. Rules are rules." The driver looked at me again, more carefully this time. Recognition flickered across his face. He scratched the back of his neck. Ma'am?" he said cautiously. "Maybe we should confirm this with dispatch first. This is unusual." Margaret nearly exploded. Unusual. What's unusual is how many times this man has thumbed his nose at the rules. If you won't do your job, I'll find someone who will." She stepped closer, pearls swinging, red pen clutched like a dagger. The neighborhood was holding its breath now. Porch doors cracked open. A neighbor's dog barked twice and went silent. Everyone was waiting to see who would win, Margaret with her clipboard, or me with my smirk. I took one slow sip of coffee, letting the heat slide down my throat, and then stepped down off the porch. My boots echoed against the driveway, each step deliberate, drawing eyes. I stopped between Margaret and the driver, close enough to see the sweat beading at her temples. "You know," I said, voice low, "it's funny how you've been waiting for this moment. Midnight, a tow truck, your grand audience, but there's just one tiny detail you overlooked." Margaret's eyes darted, her grip tightening on the clipboard. "What detail?" she hissed. I smiled, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the neighbors to lean in closer behind their curtains. "That truck," I said, tilting my chin toward the flashing hazard lights. "It doesn't work for you." The driver's eyes widened, a slow grin spreading across his face. Margaret blinked, stunned, her mouth parting but no words coming out. The cul-de-sac hummed with the charged silence of a storm about to break. And that's exactly where I left it. "That truck doesn't answer to you, Margaret. It answers to me." The words hung in the night air like a firecracker that hadn't quite gone off yet, daring someone to strike the match. The tow operator froze mid-step, his clipboard sagging at his side. Margaret's jaw dropped so far I thought her pearls might tumble right into the street. Neighbors shifted behind curtains, muffled gasps carrying across the cul-de-sac. The red and amber hazard lights strobed against stucco walls, painting the scene like a police raid. I took another slow sip of coffee, the steam curling upward, savoring the silence I'd just detonated. Now, here's the truth. This wasn't just some off-the-cuff line. I had been waiting months for this exact reveal. Margaret had been building toward it like a bad soap opera villain, staging violation after violation, dragging me into board meetings, even parading bylaws like scripture. She thought this tow truck was her final weapon, the nuclear option to prove no one was safe from her gavel. But Margaret didn't know I was already sitting in the launch room, hand on the red button. The driver, his name was Carl, solid guy, been with the company 8 years, shifted from foot to foot. He glanced between Margaret's manicured hand, jabbing at the paperwork, and me standing there with a smirk. His lips twitched, almost like he wanted to laugh, but he kept it professional. He started carefully. "Mr. Simmons, Mr. "Don't you dare!" Margaret cut him off, finger trembling as she pointed at me. "You do not answer to this man. He is a violator, a repeat offender. The board authorized this tow, not him." I lowered my coffee mug, leaning casually against the porch post. "Funny thing, Margaret. You may be president of the HOA, but I'm president of something else entirely." The driver's radio crackled on his belt, static spilling into the night. He picked it up, muttered a call sign, then glanced at me again. The whole cul-de-sac had gone so quiet that the hum of the truck's engine sounded like thunder. Margaret's face was a masterpiece of fury. Flushed cheeks, tight lips, pearl necklace rattling with each shallow breath. She snatched the clipboard from Carl's hands and scribbled across the form with her red pen, the ink bleeding onto the paper. "This is my authority," she snapped. "My signature, my word. That is the rule here." I stepped closer, boots crunching against the driveway. "Except," I said softly, "your authority doesn't sign Carl's paycheck." "I do." Carl's eyebrows shot up. The neighbors, who had been peeking through blinds, were now cracking their doors open for a better view. Across the street, I saw old Mr. Dawson in his robe with a flashlight, grinning like a kid at a carnival. Margaret staggered for a moment, caught between disbelief and rage. "You're lying," she spat. "You're making this up to embarrass me." I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my leather wallet, and flipped open a slim ID card. The company logo gleamed under the floodlights. Willow Towing Services. My name printed neatly beneath, owner and operator. I didn't shove it in her face. I just held it up like a winning hand in poker, calm and quiet. Carl let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Guess that clears that up." He set the clipboard down on the hood of his truck like it was suddenly radioactive. Margaret lunged forward, grabbing the clipboard, clutching it to her chest like a shield. "This is outrageous," she cried. "Conflict of interest. Fraud. You can't. This is illegal." Her voice cracked on the last word, echoing down the cul-de-sac. I couldn't resist. "Illegal?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Margaret, you just tried to tow a car without proper authorization from dispatch. If anyone's skating on thin ice, it's you." That landed like a slap. A ripple of laughter floated from somewhere down the street. She spun, scanning the houses, but no one dared step into the open. They were content watching her unravel from the safety of shadowed doorways. Her fury shifted gears into desperation. "This isn't over," she hissed, jabbing a finger toward me. "The board will hear about this. Every neighbor will know you manipulated the system. You think you're clever? We'll find a way to stop you." I just smiled, slow and easy, the kind of smile that makes your opponent realize the fight is already lost. "By all means, Margaret. Call a meeting, draft a letter, stamp it official. But next time you call a tow, you might want to double-check who's on the other end of the line." The air smelled of oil and hot metal, the truck's exhaust curling into the night. Carl climbed back into the cab, shaking his head in disbelief, muttering something under his breath. He shut off the winch, the clatter of chains falling silent, leaving only the chirp of crickets and Margaret's ragged breathing. She stood there, clipboard clutched tight, pearls trembling, trying to salvage the shards of her dignity. And for a moment I thought she might retreat. But Margaret wasn't built for surrender. She straightened her shoulders, eyes blazing, and marched toward me until we stood barely 3 feet apart. "You've humiliated me tonight," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. "But I promise you, this neighborhood isn't big enough for the both of us. I will end this." The words slithered between us, heavy and cold. Neighbors leaned forward in the dark, hanging on every syllable. And just like that, the standoff reset. Not finished, not settled, just paused. I raised my mug again, the coffee now lukewarm, and met her glare. "Careful, Margaret," I said softly. "The hook doesn't always snap back where you want it to." She froze, lips twitching, clipboard shaking in her hand. Then she spun on her heel, stormed back across the street, and vanished into the shadows of her front porch. The slam of her door echoed like a gunshot. And that's when I noticed. Half the neighborhood hadn't shut their blinds. They were still watching, still whispering, waiting for round 2. "I hereby terminate Willow Creek HOA's towing contract, effective immediately." The words slammed into the cramped meeting room harder than Margaret's gavel ever could. Her pearl necklace rattled as she froze, red nails hovering above a stack of glossy photographs spread across the table. The board members blinked in unison, like synchronized goldfish, staring at the letter I slid across the polished oak surface. A hush settled over the room, broken only by the whir of the ceiling fan and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching Margaret's face shift from victory to horror in the span of a breath. Now, this wasn't the way she'd pictured tonight. Margaret had orchestrated the meeting like a courtroom drama, striding in with her violation folder and photos of my driveway printed in full color. She slapped each picture down like a prosecutor unveiling evidence, her voice dripping with self-righteous authority. "This," she declared, "is what happens when one resident believes he is above the rules. Multiple vehicles, obstructing sight lines, depreciating property values." She made sure to raise her voice on that last part, depreciating property values, the HOA's version of shouting "fire" in a crowded theater. The board squirmed in their folding chairs. These were the same people who signed Margaret into power, neighbors too polite or too tired to fight her. They nodded along, murmuring about order and fairness, their eyes darting toward me like I was a defendant. For a moment it looked like she had them. That's when I slid the envelope onto the table. The seal cracked under my thumb, the paper whispering as I unfolded it. My letterhead gleamed at the top. Willow Towing Services. "Before we waste more time," I said calmly, "you should know your towing contract has been terminated. As of tonight, Willow Creek HOA has no towing provider on record." The silence was delicious. Margaret's jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a molar. She snatched the letter, scanned it with frantic eyes, and sputtered, You can't just pull out of a contract like this." "Actually," I replied, tapping the second page, "Section 14 allows either party to terminate with 30 days' notice, and since I signed the deal as owner, I invoked that clause weeks ago. This meeting, it's nothing more than a post-mortem." The board members shifted uneasily, papers rustling like dry leaves. One of them, Mr. Greenberg from the cul-de-sac, cleared his throat. "So, does this mean we don't have a towing company anymore?" I smiled. "Exactly." Margaret slammed the photos down again, desperate to regain control. "Then we'll find another contractor," she snapped. "By the weekend, this will all be fixed." But her voice cracked, betraying her. She knew as well as I did that the local market was thin. Willow Towing had been the only company willing to put up with HOA headaches. The others charged too much or flat out refused to deal with neighborhood politics. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to make the board lean in. "Or you could rethink how you enforce your rules. Maybe focus on actual safety issues instead of obsessing over who parks where." The room smelled of burnt coffee and printer ink, the stale scent of bureaucracy. Margaret's face burned crimson as whispers spread among the board. They weren't siding with me outright, but for the first time, I saw cracks in her armor. Still, Margaret wasn't one to retreat gracefully. She slammed her gavel, an unnecessary prop, since this was just a neighborhood board, and barked, "This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene after consulting legal counsel." She gathered her papers with shaking hands, pearls clinking like wind chimes in a storm, and stormed out. But revenge doesn't end in a meeting room. It spills into the street. 2 weeks later, the HOA tried to host their annual Spring Block Beautification Day. Picture it: folding tables, a rented bounce house, neighbors hauling shrubs and trash bags. Margaret strutted through the chaos, clipboard in hand, barking orders about mulch depth and hedge trimming. She wanted to prove she was still in control. Then came the parking problem. Without towing enforcement, visitors and volunteers clogged every curb. Cars double-parked, driveways blocked, mailboxes inaccessible. Neighbors grumbled, kids darted between bumpers, and one delivery truck gave up entirely, honking its horn before peeling away. Margaret fumed, waving her arms like a traffic cop without a whistle. And then it happened. Carl's truck rolled up, hazard lights blinking. Only this time, he wasn't there for me. He was on a standard city job, contracted to clear a vehicle that had blocked hydrant access. Margaret's shiny black SUV just happened to be the offender. I'll never forget her scream when the tow hook latched onto her bumper. She rushed forward, pearls bouncing, clipboard raised like she could swat the truck into stopping. But Carl just shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am. Fire code violation. Nothing I can do." The neighbors erupted. Some gasped, others laughed outright, covering their mouths. Kids pointed, cameras clicked. The president of the HOA, the queen of rules, the self-appointed enforcer of suburban order, watching her own SUV lifted onto the bed of a truck. I didn't gloat openly. I didn't need to. I just leaned against the fence, arms crossed, letting the scene burn itself into every neighbor's memory. The smell of barbecue drifted from a nearby grill. Laughter crackled in the air, and for once Margaret wasn't in control. As the truck rumbled away, her SUV perched like a trophy, I caught her eyes across the chaos. They were daggers, pure venom, promising this wasn't finished. And I knew she was right. because Margaret wasn't the type to surrender. She was the type to scheme. And if she couldn't win with bylaws or tow trucks, she'd find another battlefield.